Okay, hi everyone. So today we are going to look at into a new topic. Okay, so starting from this week until the end of the semester, I will be taking over the course from Dr. Afiq. All right. So basically, for this topic, we are going to look at a couple of things lah. All right. So okay. Let me introduce myself. I am Wan Muhammad Ashraf, Wan Mahmud. So you just can call me Ashraf. All right. So now we are going to look at into the topic, which is the introduction to forensic toxicology. All right, so let me remind you all that all of these notes have been prepared by Dr. Naji Arafat Mahat. So I'm just using it as the guidance for this course. And there are some modifications that I have made. So for me to make it much more easier for me to explain. All right. Okay. So, this is introduction to forensic toxicology. So, what are the learning outcomes that you need to be able to do after you have learned about this topic? Okay, so at the end of the lectures, the student must be able to describe what is forensic toxicology and what is the role of forensic toxicologist. All right, and then you need to be able to describe the importance of post-mortem toxicology, performance toxicology, and workplace drug testing. All right. And lastly, you need to be able to explain what is the basic pharmacokinetics and metabolisms, as well as the of pharmacodynamics as well, yeah, for drugs of abuse and other toxic substances. All right. So let's move on into the definition. Okay, what is toxicology actually? So toxicology is defined as the study of the adverse effects of chemicals onto living organisms. Whatever the side effect, adverse effects lah we are talking here of chemicals onto the living organisms, we can call it toxicology. Okay, whatever yang bad side effects lah, that's why we call adverse effects of chemicals onto any living organisms. Okay, so what is forensic toxicology pula? Okay, so forensic toxicology is defined as the application of toxicology, which is the application of the adverse effects of chemicals onto living organisms for the purpose of law. So now you are taking whatever study that you have inside toxicology and you applied it for the purpose of law. Right. So that is the definition, the differences in terms of toxicology and forensic toxicology. Right. So forensic toxicology is associated with criminal law courts, which is in terms of the homicides, and also in terms of civil court, which is in terms of the analysis and identification of medicines and the maintenance of agricultural, industrial, and public health legislation. All right. So forensic toxicology, you just remember when we talk about forensic toxicology, must be some law aspect to it. Okay, toxicology pula is the study of the adverse effects of chemicals onto any living organisms. All right. So, forensic toxicology, what is the role of forensic toxicology? So, forensic toxicologist, all right, okay, so forensic toxicologists need to perform scientific tests onto the bodily fluids or any tissue samples in order to identify any drugs or chemicals present in the body. So, the job description of a forensic toxicologist, he or she need to do scientific tests on whatever samples that you've got, because now we are talking about living organisms, which is in this case, the sample might be bodily fluids or any tissue samples. So what kind of tests that they need to do in terms of to identify any drugs or chemicals that is present inside the body which cause the adverse effect tadi yang apa the definition of toxicology. Alright? So forensic toxicologist also needs to be able to provide a quality analysis where the analysis must be complete and also accurate. Okay? And forensic toxicology also need to provide the interpretation of the results. Okay, the interpretation means that for example, when you have identified the compound of interest, or in this case the chemicals or the drugs, so you need to interpret whether that drug is a type of drug of abuse, or whether it is a common drug. Okay, so you also need to interpret whether the concentration is high enough or low enough for it to become safe. So it depends. Everything is based on the interpretation of the results. All right. And lastly, forensic toxicologists must be able to testify effectively. All right. So the role of forensic toxicologist is for you to be able to assist in the trial later on. Okay, so you need to provide your expert witness testimony later on. All right. So basically, there are 4 roles of forensic toxicologist. All right. So to perform scientific tests, to provide quality analysis, to provide interpretation of the analysis, and to testify effectively. Okay. Forensic toxicology would covers homicide and suicide, which is in terms of post-mortem forensic toxicology. It also covers those where the patient recovers but claims they have been poisoned. Okay, when there are some claims that the patient say that, oh, I have been poisoned by blah 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 blah. So you need to be able to say that whether he has been poisoned or has not been poisoned based on whatever evidence that you got prior to the trial, right? And then doping in sports, okay, of both humans and animals in terms of the performance toxicology. We will look into this later on. Workplace drug testing, and lastly, drink and drug driving offenses. All right, so this is under performance toxicology. All right, so the traditional question that must be answered, the common question, if I might say, has this person been poisoned? How would you say that this person has been poisoned? Where it doesn't matter whether the victim is alive or not, but you need to be able to uh, to to say that whether this person has been poisoned or not, whether the poison is has been administered into the victim or not. Okay, so based on this question, together with whatever supplementary queries, some supplementary queries that has been put onto you as a forensic toxicologist, the result is affirmative in terms of what is the identity of the poison. You must be able to justify, and you must be able to identify what is the poison. That's the first thing. Second thing, how was it administered? Whether it has been orally or whether it has been done by intravenously. So you need to be able to look at these things. Okay, what are the effects? Whether the effects is there are some adverse, or whether there is no effects at all. So you need to be able to provide an explanation of it, right? Was it dangerous? What was the drug is dangerous that can cause the death of the victim? And lastly, was the amount that has been administered is lethal or not? So these are the common questions that you as a forensic toxicologist needs to answer. All right. So the identity, how was it administered? What are the effects? Whether it's good or bad? Whether the drug is dangerous or not. For example, when you have 2 samples, for example, the first one is paracetamol, the second one is cocaine, for example. So you need to be able to justify whether what are the differences between these 2 drugs. Okay. and whether the amount is lethal or not. Right? Okay. So, as I mentioned before, forensic toxicologists needs to be able to do scientific tests, kan? Okay, so via those scientific tests, there are chemical analysis. So the chemical analysis must be able to detect the presence of the poison. First of all, you need to detect the poison. After you have detected the poison, then you can identify the poison. Okay, and then to measure its concentration, when once you have detected it, you can measure its concentration. Okay, and relates to the known toxicity or effects onto the organisms. So when you have measured the concentration, so now you will see, oh, whether the concentration is in the safe concentration or whether it is a lethal concentration. So we are back to the questions whether the drug or the poison is lethal or not. Okay, the forensic toxicologist must not. Okay, I need to repeat, the forensic toxicologist must not be able to determine the person who administered the poison or drug. We can we can say that, oh, the drugs or the poison has been administered orally, or the drug or the poison has been administered intravenously, but you would not be able to predict or to determine who is the person that has been administered the drug or the poison. Okay, and forensic toxicologist also does not be able to confirm the cause of death. Okay, two things that a forensic toxicologist does not is not being able to do to determine who is the person that has in this case who is the suspect lah, the suspect that has been suspected to administer the drug, and the second one is to confirm the cause of death. You can say that apa, the concentration is lethal, but you cannot say that it is the cause of death. It is lethal, but we don't know whether it is cause of death or not. So that is for forensic pathologists lah, the doctors. Alright? Okay. Alright. There is a saying here that there is no universal method of analysis for all the substances in the world. Okay, particularly where the requirement is to be able to detect, identify, and quantify the substance, typically at low concentrations and in complex matrices lah. All right, so we will look into this, I think, in the much more further chapter. Right, so there is no universal method to detect all of the drugs and all of the poison, because sometimes the amount that you have got is at very trace amount, which is low concentration, and also due to the complex matrices of the bodily fluids and tissues. Right? Okay. Forensic toxicology is the most expensive field of forensic science because it requires an expensive analytical instruments and apparatus, right? So you need to be able, based on your past experiences, when you have learned about instrumental analysis, you have learned about chromatography. So can you guys have some idea on what are the analytical instruments required for the analysis by the forensic toxicologist? Okay, so and it also needs to comply with a stringent procedure, okay, to ensure that whatever interpretation that you have got to be able to be admitted into the court. Okay, so basically you need to follow some kind of standard for it to be able to say that, okay, your data is reliable, right? And lastly, it needs to cope with new drugs or poison that has been introduced in the market that requires continuous method development and validation. Okay, so the development of the poison and drugs, okay, maybe there are some new drugs that you don't know in terms of the apa the toxicity of it. So you need to be able to keep up with the new development of drugs and poison. So this keeping up with the new drugs and the poison, you need to be able to continuously do method development and validation, because each of the drugs and poison behaves differently. Okay, so that's why it's quite laborious, and it's quite the most expensive field in forensic science. Okay, all right. So five major groups that are usually considered is the gaseous and volatile substances, the organic non-volatile substances, metallic poisons, toxic anions, and miscellaneous poisons, which requires immunoassay or special extraction techniques lah. Okay, so it is not just a liquid extraction or solid liquid extraction. Sometimes it requires much more apa state of the art of the extraction techniques, okay, for a particular drugs. So all of this, you guys needs to be able to know some examples of the five major groups, okay, and you also need to know in terms of what are the extraction techniques, and in terms of what are the suitable instruments that can be used. Okay, okay, all right.